Now we're going to move on to the new Ukrainian mobilization law. Um, and this is an article from CNN by Ivana Katsova. Um, by the way, in case anybody's wondering, she's not Russian, she's Czech. So I hope that makes a difference when I'm reading this. Basically, under Ukraine's new mobilization law, which came into effect on May 18th, Ukrainian men are now facing a choice: comply and face the possibility of being sent to the front lines, or try to evade and risk penalties and condemnation. The new law requires all Ukrainian men between the ages of 18 and 60 to register with the military and always have their document on them. However, only men aged 25 to 60 are subject to mobilization under the new law. The limit has been slashed by 2 years from 27 years, but it's unlikely to make much of a difference because of Ukraine's demographic challenges. The bill calls for all men of fighting age to show up for medical examination and renew their data in local conscription offices. Ukrainian men living abroad also have to update their contact number and address offline. Also, the Ukrainian parliament chose not to include in the bill a clause allowing soldiers to return home after 3 years of service, which had been the standard policy before the Kremlin's full-scale invasion. The move prompted widespread outrage among those who have spent the last 2 years fighting Russia's forces, leaving them feeling abandoned and with little hope of returning to civilian life or even enjoying a proper vacation. Soldiers who already serve in the army were infuriated by the fact that the bill does not give them an end date, but at the same time leaves plenty of legal possibilities for the new recruits to avoid being called up or deployed. Ukrainian serviceman Igor Firzov said in a Facebook post, "This ambiguity shows us we're being fooled," he said. So this is continuing on the same theme, but it's from Lithuanian radio and television. Kiev is increasing efforts to mobilize men who may be hiding from military services. Consular services have been suspended for them, which has caused a great deal of indignation, especially in Poland. But this is not enough, and Ukrainian leaders have started to look for additional manpower outside the country. Recently, many Ukrainians living in Poland were informed that their expiring documents would be replaced. Ukrainians scattered all over Poland came to Warsaw in the hope of obtaining their new passports, but received bad news. There's a quote: "This is a campaign against people dodging military service. They don't ask us the reason why we left Ukraine. Why do I have to fight with the army if I left legally? The diplomats are already interpreting the law in their own way." So this is a quote from one guy who wanted to stay anonymous, who doesn't want to serve. And he says, "I don't want to kill people, and in principle, I'm not ready for it. If shelling starts on the front line, I think I will be confused and will only create problems for others. I think I'd be more useful making money and bringing dollars to the country than digging trenches or guarding military facilities." He said he believes Ukraine does not have enough weapons to militarily reclaim territory seized by Russia in the war. The only way forward, he says, is a political agreement that would lead to Ukraine regaining its land. The man said that if he was to receive a draft notice, he would leave the country. "I don't want to leave. I know that things are not so beautiful and sunny in Europe, but if I had to choose between going to war and going abroad, I would choose abroad. I would pay a bribe. My life comes first, and I realize that there is a very high chance of being killed." And this article says that many people have attempted to run away, with officers detaining many people trying to cross the border of Ukraine on a daily basis. So, we've got a bill that is trying to get more people to serve. Now, obviously, it's not Ukraine's fault that they're in a war, although some may disagree with me. But I don't think it's their fault, at least solely. But they need people. This is kind of actually an interesting parallel between that migration thing, because Russia doesn't give a fuck what you think, right, about going to war. It's just drafting men who just turn 18 or essentially younger. Like, send them off. We don't care if you get killed, just go, right? So they don't, and also Russia's population-wise is a much larger country, so they don't have problems with personnel,
Yeah.
right? Ukraine, on the other hand, is trying to play the balance between caring about people's lives and respecting their choices, but also needing men to actually serve in the army if they're going to win the war. And it seems like, based on the article, personnel is a huge problem for them right now in the war. So they're kind of faced with dilemma is like, this new bill seems to be imposing stricter laws on men who don't want to fight. But at the same time, they want to kind of still respect people's choices. But I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think the question here, like, setting aside any, moral concerns we have for, who's right in the conflict, I think it's like, what is the end goal for Ukraine here? Like, what are they? They're just keeping on sending more and more people, and using more and more resources, and like, what are they actually hoping to achieve? Like, realistically, like, what's going to happen in this war?
Well, I think that's an interesting question.
Yeah, which I don't think you're ready to answer.
But before we jump into that, I want to talk more broadly about mobilization laws and whether or not you think it's just for a country to insist in a war zone to insist that its civilians participate in the war.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I think this question is, though, important. You can't avoid it because I think it's justifiable depending on the circumstances. If you're sending them, if there's a actual chance that something will be gained from it, you have like serious, like there is a it's necessary to do it for the survival of the country, for whatever greater purpose is happening. Then I mean, sure, you can conscription. It's got to be done. You've got to increase it. But is this one of those causes?
So you're saying if there's a clear strategic goal and a clear means to achieve that strategic goal, then it's just. But if there's no end in sight and no strategic goal, then it's not. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Say, yeah.
So I guess here I'll disagree with William for the first time in our conversation so far.
Juicy.
Well, I guess I want to be more broad because if we're talking about like a strategic goal, I don't think that can be advertised in terms of like how would exactly would that look like? Would the military be like, okay, we want to take this city and we need you to take the city, right? And then that seems like too specific. Maybe that's what I'm trying to say. So if I had to
I wouldn't think about it in terms of a specific like strategy goal of taking the city, but more like broadly in a war, like what direction is this war heading at?
Yeah, so maybe we can't come to a compromise then. It was a short-lived conflict.
Well, because there's tactical objectives and strategic objectives.
So I meant like they need like a general theme, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. So, for example, so your question is it right for a country to mobilize people? And I think the answer would be,
against their will. Because obviously if they voluntarily want to go, that's perfectly
conscription.
Fine.
Sure. No, I agree. And I think we agree that comes down to the actual situation and whether the country has so basically I'll put it this way. Ukraine, if really like we're talking about here, the survival of the state, right? It's the survival of the country, and the intention of Russia is to just just decimate the country, and you need to defend your homeland, right? And then we also have this idea that, well, I'll leave it with that because it's overcomplicated. But basically, I think that's a just enough reason for a country to
if
mobilize.
Russia were trying to just completely conquer the entire country.
Right, because if a country is being attacked by an adversary, like, I don't know, like the Mongol empires, like, to make it even more explicit, right? Obviously, the country is trying, and the leaders of the country are trying to protect the citizens of the country, which would, in this case, involve the citizens actually going to war. Or if it's something else like a war where the country is going to war, it starts the conflict. For example, would have to have some sort of, it would be a more complicated reason, but it would be some sort of reason about why this has to occur, right? But again, you have to have some sort of justification. If we're talking about morally, like actually morally requiring people to go to war, I think the question is different for, obviously, for the individuals and whether they should actually go. Like we see here that obviously Ukraine, the country, has decided that it's right for mobilization to occur. But the question is, like, the individuals clearly disagree, because some say that you should do it and then some say that you shouldn't. And obviously, here we have this idea that the ones who say they shouldn't are cowards, and they have like ulterior motivations than the ones they state for why they shouldn't.
Yeah.
So I think that's always a question, like why. But I think that's a personal question. I think if your question was, is it moral for an individual to do it? I think that's a personal question where, again, it's, does the individual agree with what is being told to them by their state? Because obviously the state is not. Obviously, the state is ruled by other individuals, right, who decide the actions of the state, and they're not always aligned with what's actually best for the state.
Yeah, I don't think I have too much to add there. I would stick with, again, yeah, it depends. I don't think what Ukraine is, there is much of an end goal in sight in Ukraine, realistically.
I mean, but isn't
So, can I just...
Yeah, go ahead.
So you're saying that at the moment, the way it's been presented, because they don't have like a clear goal, it seems like they just want to
Perpetuate the conflict.
perpetuate the conflict. Yeah. So you're saying that it's not right, the mobilization laws.
Yeah, I'd say that, I think.
But isn't the purpose of the mobilization laws to have more people to defend against Russia taking more territory? Like, wouldn't that be the strategic objective?
Yeah, but again, it's, I mean, in the article, for example, it's realistically we're speaking, like, is it actually going to affect them? Because first of all, the actual people that they're expecting to get from this is not that many. I mean, I'm pretty sure here I read somewhere that the generals don't think it's going to be that effective.
Right.
And secondly, I mean, they even said, I think, basically they said there was a city that they lost, and if they had more men, they could have held it for longer, which implies they would have still lost it.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm kind of like, okay,
every like person you can come up with this conscription, Russia's just gonna have 20 more people.
It just seems like more people will die.
Yeah,
in
exactly.
The
For
siege
like
of the
not
city,
really
and
much
then they'll
gain.
lose it anyway. So in that sense, I agree with William that this does kind of tie in with the tactical, but obviously it's the message that you want to send. But again, if a state is facing extinction, but then it's not really for the state to survive. It's more like for the well-being of the citizens. If you really want to push me on this, right? It would. So actually, if the only way to make the state survive is to kill a disproportionate amount of people in your country by sending them to war, maybe then that seems pretty bad. If if the alternative is, it depends what the alternative is, obviously, because we don't. You have to factor in a bunch of other things, a bunch of other variables about what the conquesting, the conqueror would be like, and what the citizens would they prefer that. But again, obviously, this is things that the individuals have to decide, and then individuals as a group have to decide, which is what the state decides, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that I'm thinking right now, and I don't know how many of them I'll say out loud. But
shoot them out.
No, I guess one, right, is this obviously draft law seems to be an act of desperation on Ukraine's part, right? They don't have the men. The men that they do have out there are tired, right? That's why they haven't they didn't include any laws to bring them back home or give them any rest, the ones who have already been out there, because they don't have any other choice, right? If they take away those guys and let them rest, they'll literally have nobody. So it seems like this is an act of desperation where they're just trying to get people to come. And to me, this is a sign that they're losing. They know they're losing. But they don't feel like they have any other choice, because from the Ukrainian government standpoint, to accept that they're losing and that they've essentially lost is a failure and a humiliation, right? Because, I mean, for so many reasons, getting defeated by Russia and bullied by the big brother, right, is like a humiliation.
Yeah, but what's more important, humiliation or
So I
people
was
not
I was
dying?
about to I was about to say
Well-
also that I had this thought that again it's what's the point of this? So if the point is that with more men we can hold out for longer, okay, but we're not gonna in this scenario, and if this is the point, then the idea is that you're not gonna reclaim any territory or any significant territory. It's just that you're gonna hold on so you're not steamrolled, right? If that's the point of this, then maybe William would say that that's a good way of doing it. But then the idea would be that you're trying to force Russia into negotiations for peace, because you're saying to take over more would be too hard for you, right? It would be
Not
too
worth
costly. Exactly, it wouldn't be worth it. So if that's the end goal, then then we can say that maybe it's justifiable. But if you're saying what I think William is saying here is that, well, you can correct me if I'm putting words in your mouth, but if the goal is instead, well, no, we have this idea that we're going to push back, with more men we can actually push back against Russia significantly enough to actually reclaim more territory that we've lost, and we're not going to negotiate basically until that occurs. So
Yeah,
it's
I mean,
kind of
that's
like an
just
uncompromising position. Then the question is, how realistic is it, given that the whole argument for there to be mobilization in the first place is that Ukraine is severely outnumbered and not the forerunner in the conflict, right? So it's kind of like you're kind of backtracking when you try to make that second scenario more feasible, because now you're going to have to say, well, actually, it wasn't as bad as we thought when we wanted the mobilization to occur. Unless you think the mobilization is going to bring in huge numbers of people and it's like going to severely overturn the situation, which
Right.
I don't think
Which it seems
the
like it's-
Ukrainians agree with either. But
It seems like it's not going to, because number one, as I mentioned, Ukraine's demographics are such that decreasing it from 27 to 25 is not really going to change that much. And also, I suspect that a lot of people in Ukraine feel the same way as this guy is like, obviously, I don't want Russia to win, and I'm against this war, but I feel like my purpose or my role can be better served in some other role besides being on the front lines in the trenches. I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm not built for this. I can assist in helping the economy, feeling the effort in some other way, right? I suspect that a lot of people feel that way, and a lot of people abroad, Ukrainians abroad, also feel that way. Is like, yeah, I am against it. I want to support it, but I feel like I can play a bigger role in sending money. I have a sneaky suspicion that what the Ukrainian government and Zelensky are really hoping for, and what they're really trying to do with this, is signal that they're desperate. And not signal that they're desperate to Ukrainians, but what they're really trying to get is soldiers and help from other countries.
Well, the West is going to feel so bad for all these poor Ukrainians getting mobilized.
well, the effectiveness of that strategy is another question. But I think Anthony is right. I think that's and we're seeing more and more like repeated pleas from Zelensky specifically.
This is just my belief, right? And a lot of people are going to criticize me for this, maybe. But my belief is he wants NATO to get involved. That's my guess.
Would they criticize you for that?
Hey guys, I want to pause the video here for one quick second to clarify one thing. So in the video, I said that I have a sneaky suspicion that Zelensky and the Ukrainian government wants NATO to get involved. Now, obviously, that's a very inflammatory thing because it signals that Zelensky would want direct war between NATO and Russia and therefore World War III. I want to clarify that I do not necessarily think that Zelensky wants to start World War III. That would be a very extreme statement. However, I do believe and know to a certain extent that Zelensky wants stronger support from NATO countries, particularly the US. So the point I was trying to get across is that he's using this mobilization law to try to get more US support. In the preceding video, we do discuss this possibility that Zelensky would want World War III, meaning a direct confrontation between NATO and Russia, and why he might want that. But that does not mean we believe or think that he wants that. So that's all. Enjoy the rest of the video.
I mean, that's insane. I mean,
It's not. But that's my sneaky suspicion.
I mean, I think the consequences of that would be obviously pretty bad, as William just expressed. But I think it's interesting because there is this idea, you were talking about humiliation before, if Ukraine loses in that way where they actually have to compromise. I mean, I think what it would have ramifications for is the actual government of Ukraine. I mean, normally when governments lose wars, it doesn't look very good for them, internally and externally. So I think that's a thing that, you know, a consideration that the current Ukrainian government would probably be having. However, obviously, we don't really know their motivations, and I don't know if I'm going to be as quick to attribute that kind of motivation to them in order for them to stay in power. Basically, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's what it would be.
Wait.
It would be more self-interested.
I'm
than
not getting that.
actually
I'm not getting the
interested in
hints. What's the?
Well, if you're saying that the government of Ukraine wants NATO and Russia to go full-scale war
I don't think it wants
in Ukraine,
them to go full-scale war necessarily, but I think it definitely wants.
well, that would be like a serious escalation, though.
Yeah, that would be a
course.
full-scale war, though. Yeah, if the NATO gets involved, that would be a full-scale.
Like
war.
the Russians would have to escalate more in order to compensate for what's happening, right? So it wouldn't.
I understand, but I guess I don't know if I'm going to go so far to say that Zelensky wants nuclear war in World War III.
Well, that's a possibility. I mean, if that happens, we don't that's
Well, wait, it's a possibility that it happens, or it's a possibility he wants that to happen?
it's a possibility that it happens.
The ulterior motive.
Yeah.
It would mean he's willing to take the risk if he does want to have a full-scale.
Oh, you
war.
mean, yeah, see, in this scenario, he would definitely be taking the risk. And yeah, I think that's why we were saying it seems, well, it would be a self-interested reason. That's the only reason I could think of, because for the country, I mean, it's going to be target number one in that conflict, right?
Yeah.
Both if we have people fighting, or even if a nuclear weapon is used, I mean, where it's going to be used.
Yeah, I mean, a serious escalated, the Ukraine's just going to be caught in between, like, NATO and Russian forces. It's going to be, like, completely.
Yeah, it'll be like the
destroyed.
worst place to
Yeah.
be on the planet. So yeah, I don't think. Well, I hope that doesn't. That's not what's going on.
Well, okay, then we've kind of danced around this question, but I mean,
Well, okay. I wanted to add something about.
Yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to talk about the idea here of the guy who was talking about him not wanting to be conscripted and how he's not going to go to the front line. I think. Do you guys think the real reason, like the actual underlying, like philosophical reason here, is because people, and I think this ties in with what William was saying about the countries having some sort of goal or some sort of thing that it wants to achieve, is that it's to do with purpose. And like if people think that a war has purpose, then they would be willing to put their life there because they actually think that they're dying for something, so they have a
Absolutely,
purposeful death.
absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's, so I think the main thing, I mean, I know he gave like a number of reasons here, but I think like the main reason people feel this sort of desperation is that they're feeling like they're just giving their life away for a conflict that's not going to end well for them. They're not going to have a meaningful death, basically. It's not going to matter.
I think fear too plays a role.
No, I agree. I think fear and not wanting
but
to
fear,
kill a
it's-
person and so on.
You can overcome fear in order to like go into war. Like fear is always a factor, but if the cause is meaningful, the fear will be overcome. And the fact that it's not meaningful enough to overcome the fear means that there is sort of just a
Yeah, you can overcome your
pointlessness to
moral
it.
principles. You can overcome your inability to wage warfare by learning how to. Right, you can overcome all these things, but the purposelessness seems to me like, I mean, if you truly think there's no purpose to it, then I don't see how you can overcome that.
I mean, I think you're right. Like, look, if a Russian with a gun showed up in front of their house and was like, "I'm gonna kill your mother and sisters," I think the dude would pick up a gun and fight back.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Right. But I think
But the problem is that it has to be like a more abstract
well,
notion of purpose here, right?
the problem is, this idea of nationhood and everybody's your brother in the nation. I don't think many people actually think like that.
Yeah. No.
When it comes, they can say, "Oh, God bless America," whatever, brothers and sisters. But I think a lot of people, when it comes actually down to like internalizing that, they don't have that camaraderie with everybody in their nation,
Mm.
right? And, dying to protect your family, or like I can speak just for me personally, I care way more about giving the ones close to me and family like a better life than protecting my country.
Mm.
Like
Yeah.
that's just my personal thing. And I think if I had to wager, a lot of people feel a similar way.
Well, a lot of people do view fighting in the war as protecting their family. Right? A lot of people say that that's what they're doing.
Sure.
They're doing it for their family.
Sure,
So,
but if you're living in Western, in Lviv, where not much is happening in the war, you're probably a lot less likely to feel that way than if you're from Mariupol or Kharkiv or whatever.
yeah, but I think everybody sort of has to find their purpose if they are going to do this. I think there are things you can find in a country that are worth protecting. Put it that way. But I agree with you that it's not self-evident. And it's not the kind of patriotism that people talk about when they're like, watching football or something and they're like, yeah, I like my country. But a lot of that doesn't translate into actual conflict. And what do you actually value? And do you value it enough to think that it's purposeful to give your life for it?
Mm. I mean, what do you think, William? Would you take up a gun and,
Probably not. No.
No.
I mean, obviously it depends on the type of cause it was, but yeah, I mean, as I was saying, it would only be if it aligns with like it or actually the conflict like really affects me personally, and there's like some serious stake in it.
Mm-hmm.
And usually most conflicts are not like that at all.
All right. Well, I mean, given that we've kind of established that the only way we can justify this, and the only way that we ourselves would see ourselves going in, would be if there was a real purpose to this. I mean, you asked this at the beginning, but like, okay, what is the purpose for Ukraine at this point?
Yeah, well, I mean, they're gonna have to sue for peace at a certain point, I think, and they're obviously gonna have to concede like something to Russia, territory for certain. For being realistic about it, that's where it's gonna happen. It's just a matter of time. They can drag out the conflict longer and maybe get a more advantaged position on the table. But
like, is this the point where we can legitimately say that Ukraine is lost?
Well, I mean, depends how you see it. As it could be seen as a loss, could be maybe not. I mean, certainly does seem like a bit of a loss having to.
By their standards, I would say.
Yeah, yeah. In terms of the international sort of the way it's going to be seen, I think it would be as a loss. I mean, Russia basically invaded and got away with it in a sense.
And took some territory along the way.
Yeah,
but I guess you could also frame it as we prevented them from taking Kiev and taking all of Ukraine.
Yeah, but I mean, was that ever really like an objective to just take the entire country? I mean,
well, I think Athen, you're a good spokesperson for what will be said in the future. But I think William is kind of trying to get at what actually was. Yeah, it's. I would agree with the. What I said before was that I think the realistic goal here, if you want to talk about the mobilization, is to just make it extremely difficult to take any more. And maybe, again, obviously we don't know the details about the war, but maybe there's some sort of tactical objectives that can be achieved with more manpower.
I mean, here's what I would say. Here's what I would say. What I would say is if we're looking for, if I'm going to justify this action and justify all of this stuff, that's what I would say. If Ukraine thinks by this additional laws that it can get to a point, not where it's going to win, but it's moving, it's flipped the script a little bit so that it is either neutral or in a slightly favorable position. Like meaning that the direction that the war is heading is moving in a slightly more favorable position toward Ukraine, where they can in a position to negotiate better peace terms than they were now. That is the only way that I could see that would be a real purpose for doing this. Because I think you're right, the winning everything is off the table. But if you can get to a point where you're in a position to have a little bit more hand for the peace talks, I can make an argument.
But again, it depends, like, what are we talking about here? A couple of yards? I mean, So I'm not disparaging it, by the way. Obviously, like I said before, there can be actual like tactical objectives. But again, all this is just abstract stuff that we're talking about here. We don't know the details of what's going on. But overall, I agree with William that it's just the current stated goal. I can see why Ukrainians are reluctant, like the person that was interviewed, about going to the front, thinking that it's not going to make a difference for their country.
Because I think officially the stated Ukrainian goal is to win the war.
Well, as far as I'm aware, they're not negotiating.
Yeah,
that's the official goal. Reclaim all the territory, win the war.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems
unlikely.
Your words, not mine.
Well, I think you've said a bit more.
Hey, listen. I'm just here to listen to your guys' answers and give additional commentary.
Impartial observer.
Yeah.
Leave a comment in the comment section below.
Yeah. All right.